The Canadian Grand Prix is over and it is yet another lights to flag victory for the Red Bull driver of Max Verstappen. And whilst that may sound boring, the Canadian Grand Prix was actually one of the most interesting races in my opinion, and it was also one of the most enjoyable races of the year, as we got to see a mixture of strategies, and in today's video I am going to be looking into the data from a hectic Canadian Grand Prix. Now, let's get to the video. As usual, I'll be talking about the likes of Ferrari, Aston Martin, Mercedes and Red Bull later on, so stick around for that. The Canadian Grand Prix, as mentioned, was a race filled with different strategy options, as we saw a mixture of 1 and 2 stop strategies, with the drivers using the medium and hard tyres in different variations, and Gasly also used a soft tyre. Perez did as well, but that was just to go for the fastest lap, so we're not really going to count that. With that, we saw a total of 4 different strategies, with the drivers either using 1 medium and 1 hard tyre, 2 mediums and 1 hard tyre, 1 medium and 2 hard tyres, or 1 soft and 2 hard tyres. We saw a grand total of 33 pit stops, and the fastest lap of the race was set by Sergio Perez due to him coming in right at the end of the race and bolting on a set of soft tyres, and the fastest lap was a 1:14.481. So the question is then, with all these different strategies, which teams and drivers got it right and which ones got it wrong? Well, one team that got it a little bit wrong sadly was Haas. In my qualifying data analysis video, I mentioned that whilst Hülkenberg did an amazing job, it would actually be very difficult for him to keep it up over a race distance, and once again we saw the Haas team and drivers sink like a stone in the race. As this graph provided by Formula Data Analysis shows, Hülkenberg had the slowest race pace out of anyone during the entire race. This is once again down to the heavy tyre wear on the Haas, as even Kevin Magnussen was sinking like a stone during the race. You can see just how bad it was when we compare the times of the entire race of Nico Hülkenberg to Alex Albon in the Williams. Remember, Albon did 1 less stop than Hülkenberg and carried those hard tyres all the way from lap 17 to the end of the race. This shows us that early on in the hard tyre stint, Hülkenberg was actually able to match and go a little bit faster than Albon, but after 10 laps or so on the hard tyres, Hülkenberg starts to fall back, and then after then, Hülkenberg stops for a second time. Once again, he is faster than Albon, but also once again, that does not last, as after only a handful of laps, his pace drops below what Albon can achieve, as Albon is managing to maintain the pace in the hard tyres, but Hülkenberg simply cannot. This is a huge issue for Haas, and it has been something that has plagued them since 2019, and they still are not able to find a cure. If they can do that, then they may score some points, but if they can't, then points will be hard to come by when F1 is not racing on a circuit which has a super smooth surface. Speaking of Albon though, the Williams driver had another incredible race, as he was able to make the one stop work and raced absolutely flawlessly, even managing to set his fastest lap of the race on lap 68. But how was the Williams able to maintain position despite the tyres being so old during the race? Well, one reason is because they had incredible top speed, as this graph shows. Williams were, as always, one of the slipperiest cars in a straight line. When we take a look at the fastest lap time of Albon and compare it to, say, Ocon, who was directly behind him, what can we see? Well, what it shows us is that apart from down the back straight, Albon actually has better straight line speed, and even though his tyres are much older than Ocon's, Albon is able to have the confidence to still be later on the brakes and carry more speed through some of the corners. But for Williams, they can be very happy with this result. They brought a major upgrade to the circuit, and yes, it was a track that would suit their car, but this result confirms that they have certainly taken a step forward, and next time out in Austria, they could potentially go well again. I just want to say that if you are enjoying this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now, let's get to the top 4 teams, and let's start with Ferrari. For Ferrari, the Canadian Grand Prix was a race where, for once, they not only got the strategy call right, but they called it to absolute perfection, as Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz managed the one-stop strategy similarly to Albon, but they pitted much later in the race. Not only did they do the one-stop, but Ferrari also had great pace throughout the stint, which is something that they have struggled with a lot during this season. To show how good their pace actually was, I've brought up the pace during the race between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. And what can we see? Well, what we see is that on both the medium and the hard tyres, Leclerc is actually able to maintain a similar level of pace to Lewis, which is vastly different than last time out in Spain, where Ferrari were pretty hopeless when it came to race pace. Ferrari's consistency is very impressive this weekend, and I do still believe that had they not thrown qualifying away, at least one of the Ferraris would have been on the podium. Let's take a look now at the fastest lap of both Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc to see what we can learn. Neither driver had access to DRS across his lap, and that is worth noting. During the lap, Ferrari managed to reach a higher top speed down every straight, as Leclerc seemingly had less drag than Hamilton. For Ferrari, this weekend was a big missed opportunity, but I do believe this could be something for them to build on for the next race at the Red Bull Ring, and we may just see one of the Ferraris on the podium at the Red Bull Ring. For Aston Martin, the Canadian Grand Prix was once again a tale of two halves, as Fernando Alonso has the pace of the second fastest driver over a race distance, but his teammate Lance Stroll was slower than both Alpine drivers and had similar pace overall to Yuki Tsunoda, as this graph shows. And now to show this, let's take a look at the race pace of Fernando Alonso and compare that to Stroll. And what can we see? Now, Stroll did have to come through the field, however at no point really during the race did Stroll have the pace of Fernando Alonso. And when we compare the two drivers' fastest laps, it all becomes a lot clearer. During this lap, Stroll has the benefit of DRS, which is why his top speed is significantly higher than Alonso's. However, through all of the corners on both entry and exits, Alonso is able to carry more speed. He can brake later than Stroll and get onto full power sooner than Stroll, and through the final chicane, Alonso carries way more speed. Fernando once again is showing that he is racing at a higher level, and when I am talking about the Red Bull a little bit later on, I will show you just how Alonso's pace compares with Verstappen's. For the Mercedes team, the Canadian Grand Prix was another good race that shows their progress. However, Russell made a critical error, which was part of the reason why he was unable to finish the race. The Montreal circuit is historically one of the toughest races of the year on the brakes, and this year it claimed Russell, as he had to retire due to fading brakes late on in the Grand Prix. But for Lewis Hamilton, he was stuck in a race-long duel with Fernando Alonso, and when we compare the lap times of both drivers, what can we see? On the medium tyres during the first stint, Hamilton had ever so slightly better pace than Fernando Alonso, but when they change onto the hard tyres because of the safety car, Alonso all of a sudden finds the edge and he becomes the faster car between the two. This is something we have seen in other races. The Aston Martin is typically a lot stronger on the harder tyres, and this was the case this weekend. During the second stop, Hamilton changed back onto medium tyres, but Alonso opted for another set of hard tyres, and this is where the duel between the two drivers really came alive. Hamilton was able to set faster lap times than Alonso, as this graph shows initially, but around lap 60, as you can see, Hamilton starts to falter a little bit as his medium tyres give up the best of their life, and Alonso is able to cling on to P2 whilst Hamilton is in P3. Mercedes once again executed a brilliant race, but were just off the pace of Aston Martin. Austria though could be a better race for them, as we could see another titanic battle between Aston Martin and Mercedes, and we may even see Ferrari get into the fight as well. Finally for Red Bull, at least Max Verstappen, it was business as usual as he went and led every single lap of the race, but Verstappen actually had a threat during some of the race from Fernando Alonso, and when we compare the two drivers, we can see that Verstappen was faster, but there were periods of the race where Alonso was able to match Verstappen, and we can see that had Verstappen made any large errors during the race, like he nearly did towards the end of the race, we could have seen a very different outcome. And when we compare Verstappen to Perez, we just see how bad of a race the Mexican driver had, as he was stuck in traffic and really struggled to get through the midfield, which is vastly different than when Verstappen had to come through the midfield in both Miami and Saudi Arabia. For Perez, he is now coming under pressure from Fernando Alonso for P2 in the Drivers' Championship, and this is because of some of the scruffy races. Next time out, it is the Red Bull Ring, and Perez will need to impress at the team's home race. So, what did we learn from the Canadian Grand Prix? Haas have terrible race pace, and they need to solve this quickly. Williams are moving forward with their upgrades. Aston Martin and Mercedes are getting closer and closer in terms of pace, and Ferrari have good race pace at stop-start circuits. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, as always, comment, leave a like, and subscribe for more F1 content.